And now going to mute everybody. Over to you, Leslie and James.
So, hello, James. I'm not sure if our chairman, Roger, is able to actually have any voice, at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead. If Roger jumps in and says, oh, you can hear me now, that's fine. I'd like to introduce James Lowen, who contacted us by our club website to offer a Zoom meeting tonight, and we were very pleased to take his offer because we haven't been able to have our regular members afternoon this month because of COVID. So a Zoom meeting seemed to be the best way we could actually connect with people. And the committee suggested that this talk, 52 Shades of Green, could well be one that we would all enjoy. James, I know, is a award-winning wildlife photographer. He also writes, and I have seen his articles in Birdwatching magazine. I'm sure he's in others as well, but that is the one I take, so that's where I've seen him. And I would like to introduce you to him and hope that you will enjoy his photographs and his information, as I'm sure I shall. Please welcome James Lowen.
Thank you very much, Leslie. It's a real honour to talk to you all. Zoom has been quite the revelation for birdwatching and natural history societies around the UK in helping us all stay connected and engaged during these COVID times. So it's a real pleasure to talk to you today. And actually, what I want you to do, first of all, is just to think back to your life pre-COVID and to think back to, how many of you had a weekend away wildlife watching in Britain in the year before the March lockdown? I can see some people nodding, others I can't see at all. But how many of you, went wildlife watching for weekend 5 or more times, or 10 times? Or how about 52 times? Oops, hang on. Wait. And what did you see on your weekends? Was it red deer rutting, perhaps? Or a puffin strutting? What about salmon leaping? Or bottlenose dolphin jumping? On your weekend, you might have seen helleborines blooming, or heard a natterjack toad chirring, or perhaps seen an otter chomping, or bluebells carpeting. Perhaps it was hooper swans awakening, or fungi proliferating, or seabirds feasting, or adders writhing. Perhaps you looked underwater and saw snakelocks anemones waving, or saw a swallowtail nectaring, or perhaps a water vole munching, or waxwings trilling, a fen-raft spider guarding, or a four-spotted chaser hawking. Perhaps it was knot fretting, or starlings swirling, or a grey seal pupping, or a basking shark cruising. Now, such is the rich diversity, the sort of bounteous joy, the unrelenting excitement that's offered by British wildlife on our doorstep this weekend, next weekend, and every weekend. And the wildlife is still offering it, even if we can't get out under COVID constraints and see it. But at some point, we will be able to. So there's plenty out there to see. Now, who's talking to you? You've actually just seen me, so I won't bother with that. But I'm a writer, as Leslie said, on nature, conservation and travel, particularly sort of the join, the nexus between them. I've written 11 books so far, of which 5 are focused on Britain and 6 are focused on other parts of the world. 3 of them have won prizes, 2 getting Travel Guide Book of the Year awards, which is quite funny because they're actually books about wildlife, but they've won travel awards. And another one winning a separate award in the US. This year I've got 2 books out, both about moths. One is a travel narrative along the lines of Patrick Barkham's book, The Butterfly Isles, or John Donne's book, Orchid Summer, if you know those. And the second is a beginner's identification guide to common moths, particularly those that visit gardens. As Leslie said, I also write for a number of magazines, including Birdwatching, but also Nature's Home, the RSPB magazine, BirdLife, newspapers including The Telegraph. I edit travel guides, and I also run a magazine about birdwatching in South and Central America. And the latter is actually pertinent because it's part of the backstory to this book, which in itself is a eulogy to sort of all things natural and national. And this backstory started in 2006 when my wife got a job with the Foreign Office in Argentina, and we moved house and migrated south to live. And there I was really lucky. I earned my living as a wildlife guide, as a nature writer, showing people wildlife in Antarctica, and so many other exciting things. But like all good things, our life in South America, our vida sudamericana, came to an end, and we followed the route of many an Arctic tern and migrated back north towards Britain. And this was a Britain that I suddenly saw with fresh eyes. It was a Britain that was effectively a blank canvas, a Britain that I really wanted to explore. It was a Britain that was full of natural diversity, full of joy and excitement. I'd thought I was going to be bored coming back to Britain, but I saw it completely afresh. And so it was a Britain that, you know, needed writing about, a Britain that needed to be rediscovered, a Britain that offered an entire year's worth of wildlife watching breaks, one for every single weekend of the year. And with so much diversity involved, so covering flycatchers and fritillaries, but also fungi and fish. Now, sort of amongst this embarrassment of riches, and this map shows the rough location of the weekends that I reckon are the top 52 in Britain. And which are the finest? You know, from Scilly to Shetland, where should we go and when, and what should you see and how? So it's a tough call, but I'm going to share with you in the next hour my 12 most favourite weekends, one for each month. And the weekends I've chosen take into account that you're all bird watchers, but part of my ethos is to persuade birders to like butterflies, or if you already like butterflies, to become botanists. So although we're going to be majoring on birds, these voyages of discovery will take us right across the faunal and floral groups. I'll also throw in sort of the odd extract from the book. So let's have a look at those. These are the location of the weekends that I'm going to focus on. Let's start, as we're in January, with January. 5 options up for grabs, and I'm going to go for the very first one. I mean, how better to start a non-lockdown new year than the literal wild goose chase in the home of peaty whiskey. So we're going to go for Isla in the Inner Hebrides. So fleeing the freezing Arctic in October, there's 40,000 barnacle geese and a quarter of Greenland's white-fronted geese that spend the month of January adjacent to the North Atlantic on the island of Isla in the Inner Hebrides. And here they munch all this lovely rich grass and tightly packed flocks. But when spooked, which could be from a peregrine or from a passing tractor or even just from paranoia, the whole throng wishes upwards, yapping and yelping and sort of festooning the sky with these wonderful monochrome forms like an MC Escher sculpture. Now, few birds' names have such a curious etymology as the barnacle goose. And it's not a nod to the species' favourite food, but instead the goose's name comes from its one-time perceived genesis. So for 600 years, this goose was conjectured to grow underwater in goose barnacle shells, which is what these are, the shells clinging to timber, and then to sort of emerge somehow onto land in the autumn. Now, these geese are amazing in themselves, but Isla's got a lot more to offer. So you can catch your breath from this wonderful goose chase by imbibing the sort of the wealth of other wildlife in this wonderful land of Lagavulin and Laphroaig. Now, a few places in Britain are better than Isla to see chough. And these crows are remarkable. They're such fun to watch. Gregarious red-billed aerobats hanging in the wind and then plummeting with closed wings, only to put out just before a crash landing and twisting back upwards and away. The Rins, which is an area, sort of an upland area on Isla, also offer a great chance of seeing golden eagle at a really low altitude. And increasingly also white-tailed eagle, these flying barn doors wandering from natal grounds on other Hebridean islands. Along the coast, you can wander along, checking the bays for otters, which are quite pleasingly common on the 190 kilometres of Isla's shoreline. And perhaps you can also peruse harbours or beaches for grey seal and the odd harbour seal, as here. Now, after Atlantic storms in particular, you can actually search beaches for the washed up goose barnacles that often cover driftwood in here a plastic container. So within a single hour, you can see both barnacle goose and the shelled creature from which it was once thought to emerge. What else can you look for, as you're scanning the sea? Perhaps on sea locks such as Loch Indal, look for great northern diver and Slavonian grebe, as here. And perhaps also for birds such as long-tailed duck, in my view, the smartest duck that exists, and Teistes, also known as black guillemots. And if you depart by ferry, it's worth saving just a half day in your weekend to explore the east side of the island en route to the ferry terminal. Mammals you could see include feral goat, otter and seals, and there's also a nice little pseudo feeding station for red deer, which means you can have really good views from the road. But then after that, you can weigh anchor with the yapping and the yelping of geese in your ears, because Isla is the best place in Britain for wild geese. On then to February. Again, a whole series of options here. We're going to head to mid Wales, and we're going to head in particular to Giggering Farm. So 200 years ago, red kites commonly scavenged scraps from the back streets of London. 50 years ago, persecution had reduced their range, compressed their range to isolated valleys in the middle of Wales, and there's perhaps just 100 individuals left. But now, thanks to reintroductions, as we all know, in Newbury, sort of in the epicentre there, they're once more a familiar, striking sight across Britain. Red kites are well and truly back. But just because, sorry, I should have clicked earlier, but just because red kites are now sort of commonplace, it doesn't make it any less special to see them in their core domain of mid Wales. And the best place to see them, the most spectacular place to see them, is Giggering Farm, because here it's on a hillside, sort of farm managers spread offcuts of meat over an open grassy area. So all you need to do is take your seat in one of a number of hides and enjoy the showtime that is mealtime. First on the set are birds such as this, so carrion crow, rooks and jackdaws, and they're preempting the tractor that's coming bearing all these offal. If you listen carefully, you should be able to hear the coarse croak, which signifies the arrival of a raven. They're heftier breath than. On fence posts nearby, there are common buzzards loitering, waiting their time. And in more distant trees, you might decipher the shape of a few kites, which are also at the moment fairly sanguine about the bloody gifts that are on offer. Now, eventually, however, one buzzard, or usually an adult, sheds its inhibitions and stoops onto the feast. And then suddenly, as if in response to a sort of starting gun that only these birds can hear, feathered bedlam breaks loose, and from every direction, buzzards rush in to kind of consume this vast meaty feast. And meanwhile, the kites are a little bit more nervous. They're circling above, but they're getting increasingly frenetic. And eventually, they too plummet in, sort of adeptly grabbing a beefy morsel in their talons from amidst this seething, screeching mass of feather. Now, there's fully 600 birds, 400 of them kites, often attending this frenzied feast. It can be really quite hard to look. So, it's worth spending some time enjoying the aerial acrobatics, after bird swoops down, its wings and its legs outstretched before wheeling and wiggling back upwards. Or you could look upwards to birds that are bickering. Some birds are pirates pursuing others until they sort of reluctantly release their meaty prize. Or you can watch the ones coming in and sort of crash landing and grabbing a bite to eat before departing again. So it really is, a case of where should I look next? Really quite a spectacular few hours. But the more you look, the more you see. So I've shown many adult red kites previously, but here's an immature. You can see with the kind of sort of streaks below. There's also previously, we've just seen a kite marked with a coloured wing tag, which is so conservationists can track the movement of individual birds. There's also in a population this size likely to be some kites with plumage anomalies. So this bird's got a few white feathers, and there's even one that's almost a cream kite, a red kite or a black kite. Talking of black kites, actually one year there was actually a black kite there, one year that I visited. And this is that bird, a bird from continental Europe that had somehow stuck around and fed on the red kite's food. But suddenly, after 3 hours, the meat and the meat eaters are suddenly noticeable by their absence. And you realise that the curtain on the show at Gigwin has fallen. And for the first time in what feels like days, you breathe because the excitement has been so intense. So on then to March. Where should we go? Where should we head? Well, we're going to go for the second weekend there, the 11th in total in the year. And we're going to head to the Suffolk Sandlings, the coastal Suffolk. So here, the sort of the early spring sun is so pleasant that you're pausing on your heathland walk to soak it up. And the morning air is warmed even further by effortless southerly winds that whisper the evolution of the seasons. And you bask, and you relax. And then suddenly, with a grimace, you notice a dog turd a few meters along the sandy path. But suddenly the dog turd flicks out a tongue. It's not coiled feces, but it's a curled serpent. And like you, this male adder is lapping up solar rays. It's sprawling on sandy soil beneath the gorse bush. Now, few places are better than the Sandlings of Suffolk to watch adders freshly emerge from the winter slumber. And few sites in the Suffolk Sandlings are as good for this venomous reptile as sheltered south-facing slopes of Dunwich Heath, National Trust property. For someone like me who is obsessed with adders, I call it my adderiction, it's a joy indeed. And you see so many potential adder spectacles. Males vacate their winter den before females. They stake out territories. Early in the season, which March tends to be, the snakes are often sluggish and they allow really quite prolonged, protracted views at close range. But as the slopes sort of heat up and the cold-blooded bodies thaw out, the snakes slither off to hunt, and later in April to spar through a dance-off. And that cues your own departure. Now, dominated by bell heather, these Sandlings have hosted a remarkable avian comeback. Dartford warblers were extinct in Suffolk by the 1920s, but 70 years later, recolonised. And now the coastal population is really quite vibrant, cold winters aside. Dunwich and Westleton Heaths form the warbler's heartland. And if you go for a walk there, you should see several of these fiery-eyed, punk-haired males scratching out their songs from top of a prominent perch. Also in this area, particularly if there's some birch or pine array around, you should listen for the lullaby, the liquid lullaby of a woodlark, which for me is the most magnificent avian song there is in Britain, at least, even better than the nightingale. And in this area of birch, there's other things to look at, such as birch polypore, which wreath dying trees. Now these polypores used to be called razor strop fungus because they used to be used to sharpen the cutthroat razors that barbers use. So they're quite unmistakable, and also with a rich cultural heritage, and also quite large, up to about 20 centimetres in diameter. So the following day, after your Dunwich heathland trip, head to RSPB Minsmere, which is just next door. It's got a splendid diversity of habitats, from scrub and scrape, wood and reed, heath and beech. And so it's a splendid stage for celebrating the arrival of spring. And there are plenty of signs of the shifting seasons. So start off with the pond near the visitor centre, which often holds the libidinal ball of mating common frogs. The same pond often has water shrews and also water voles. And activity here is increasing. The first brimstone, the first small tortoiseshell, are coaxed out to wing their way across the sunny glade. Nearby, there's a Chetty's warbler that's exploding into song just where the bush and reed intersects. And indeed, it's the reed beds that I reckon provide the day's major interest. To see all of Minsmere's reedy specialities, you need to look in, on, beside, and above the sea of sedge. Now, deep within this painstakingly managed habitat, there's a bittern booming as if blowing across the top of a water bottle, or a beer bottle if you prefer, depending if it's that time in the evening. So why not wait a while at one of the two hides, Bittern Hide or Island Mere Hide, and you should see one of these scarce herons feeding in the reed bed fringes or offering a deep-chested, heavy-winged fly past. Wonderful creatures, never get enough of them. Now, parties of bearded tits are around as well, perching on stems, pinging to retain contact with one another. And this bird holds a unique distinction, I think. I think it's the only species in Britain that resides within a monotypic family, So a family that contains only one species. But there's probably someone cleverer than me who can think of another one. But I think that's right. But up above the bearded tits, there's a marsh harrier pair displaying. The male circling at height before tumbling down to the reeds. And in established pairs, the female will lock talons with her partner, and they'll flail downwards, sort of conjoined, until they hit the reeds and the female heads inside. Once you've filled your boots with the reed bed things, it's time to explore the rest of the reserve. And as I said, Minsmere has sort of got everything. So there's a muntjac grazing beside a wooded trail here. In the absence of hunting, and obviously on a reserve, muntjacs are as showy here as anywhere. And although some people don't like them, in part because they're non-native and because they browse the understory that nightingales need to breed, I've got a particular fondness for them. I think they're rather cute little creatures. Over on the scrape, the famous lagoon at Minsmere, avocets are bleating through upturned bills. This is the RSPB's flagship species in its most iconic location. And nearby, stunning Mediterranean gulls are displaying with lots of head bowing and mewing. There's a colony of med gulls now at Minsmere. It's a kind of sight that would have been unthinkable last century when they were still quite scarce. And as you leave for the evening, you might see a herd of red deer, sort of females, hinds, bumbling through the South Belt woods, pausing to observe you, just as you paused in the dullish sun right at the outset of the weekend. On now to April. I mean, what a choice we've got here. Reptiles, plants. We're going to go north. We're going to go up to Scotland, and we're going to have a weekend of famous grouse. So it's dawn on an isolated Scottish moorland. It's rugged, it's remote, it's riotous. And as the mist dissipates, you pick out a cluster of swarthy, testosterone-fueled game birds strutting their stuff. So this is an early start with black grouse at the RSPB's Corrimony Reserve. These grouse lek or display at dawn, and the action fizzles out within 2 hours, which is why you need to get there earlier. Now, parading grouse tend to be quite susceptible to disturbance, so the best way to see them is probably to join the RSPB minibus safari that runs regularly. And enables you to be entertained by the avian posturing from the seclusion of a shared transport, so you don't actually disturb them. Clearly, we've got to wait for COVID to disappear before we can get back in that type of shared transport, but the principle is there. So there's 10 male black grouse, gathering in a small arena here. Each is velvety black with this wonderful red skull cap and the white undertail. Each has his head bowed, his chest pumped, his wings drooped, and his tails fanned. Each is cooing continuously and hissing hysterically as it mock charges its rivals. And all this is to sort of court a demurely garbed female. But black grouse are truly special creatures. Nothing quite like them. Now, when the vim wanes, it's time to drive southeast to the Findhorn Valley. It's a fine location to view golden eagles, and if you pan across mountaintops and the sky above for his or her soaring majesty, with luck and clear weather, you should be able to see it. Little point going there when it's drizzling, because eagles tend to sulk when it's wet. But if they are sulking, then mammals provide a really quite a good sideshow. There's scores of red deer, which are sort of commanding the wild rocky skyline. And valley slopes quite high up often hold mountain hare. And by now, this montane lagomorph has probably forsaken its white winter pelage for the brown fur of summer. And then on to Speyside as the skies fade, and as dusk drowns day beneath some Caledonian pines, it's time to head into the Rothiemurchus estate and into a wood cabin where one of the local tourist operators offers superb mammal viewing of not only badgers, but the mammal that everyone really wants to see up in Scotland, which is pine martens coming in to scoff food that's laid out each evening. Now, the next day, it's a second pre-breakfast start. Here, you're hopefully going to go to Lochgarten Osprey Centre in Abernethy Forest. And I say hopefully because the male capercaillies you've come to see haven't quite been so cooperative in recent years. Capercaillies are undergoing quite a problem in Scotland at the moment. But in theory, the centre should still offer a ringside seat at the dance bout of Britain's biggest grouse. Now, with its sort of wings dangled, its tail spread and sort of neck outstretched, the male capercaillies broadcast this amazing vocal trap that settles samples, popping champagne corks, reverberating drum rolls, and even kind of quite loud belches. And this carries on up until a female approaches. So anytime there could be a female present and there's more than one male co-located, tensions often rise and squabbles break out between rival males. And indeed, if you happen to be wandering in the Abernethy forest and come across one of these rogue male capercaillies, as I did with this individual, it's time to retreat. I wasn't aware it was there. I'd unwittingly encroached on its territory, and so I needed to retreat quite quickly before it decided to treat me as another male capercaillie and attack me. Anyway, when the capercaillies have lost interest, it's time to track down Lockgarton's other specialities. Foremost amongst them, the osprey pair will be recently back from their African winter quarters, and they'll be admired by roughly 35,000 visitors in a typical non-COVID summer. But around the Osprey Centre, there are also red squirrels, beautifully bushy-tailed and bright-eyed as ever. And above an understory, which is covered with blaeberry, juniper and cowberry, a purring call draws attention to Britain's most localised tit, the crested tit, a feathered bundle of energy and a real personal favourite. Now, as you hike through the forest, these large domes of desiccated pine needles are bound to catch your eye. And if you look closely, the mounds are alive with their creators, which are thousands of wood ants. Now, Speyside hosts 4 species of these colonial wonders. And in old growth forests, you're going to look for northern wood ant, which is what these are, and Scottish wood ant as well. And there are a few thousand of these ant citadels across the Abernethy region. Now, on Lochgarten itself, perhaps there'll be something like a Drake goldeneye throwing its head back in display. And for the rest of the weekend, why not head up, assuming there's favourable weather at least, why not spend the afternoon on the fell fields of Cairngorm's ice-shattered mountain tops, picking your way between plants such as stiff sedge and woody fringe moss. Now, you might see another black grouse, which sometimes wander the valley near the ski lift car park. And you should see red grouse on the way up. But obviously the highlight, once you get to the top of the funicular, is to look for ptarmigan, which is Britain's final grouse and the final grouse of your weekend. So uniquely amongst Britain's grouse, but rather like a mountain hare, for example, ptarmigan has different plumages for winter when it's white and summer when it's mottled brown. And so this camouflage game bird enables you to complete your grouse quartet in what should be a fabulous Highland spring and famous grouse weekend. Now on to May. We're going to stay in Scotland, despite 5 weekends to choose from. And we're going to head into the Hebrides. Here the air is fresh, it's moist with the spirit of the Atlantic. The ground is a paroxysm of pink and yellow, which is the maca in fragrant bloom. The slopes resound with the bleating, whinnying and piping, which are the territorial calls of northern waders. And from the iris beds slinks the sworn enemy of mechanised agriculture, the reclusive, the rare corncrake. On the rocky shore are family fishers, otters no less. And all this wonderful natural bounty is backed by the whitest of beaches and the bluest of skies. This is North Uist, a small island at the heart of the Hebrides and just an hour's flight from Glasgow, yet apparently in a different world. This weekend is about serenity and senses. It's about wildlife amidst wilderness. It's time to relax, to enjoy and to imbibe. Now, where the crushed shell sand meets peat-based meadows, this wonderful habitat called maca develops. It's one of Europe's rarest and most diverse habitats with an amazing 45 plant species per square metre. In May, the blooms are largely white, such as here with daisies and eyebright, and yellow with marsh marigold, common buttercup, but also the pink of emerging orchids is brightening the damper areas. Now, these stunted squat marsh orchids were once considered a single island endemic called Hebridean marsh orchid, but recent genetic work shows that they may well be an ecologically isolated form of another species, Pugsley's marsh orchid. But in all these orchid things, the jury is always out as to what's actually going on. Now up here on North Uist, corncrake is locally common thanks to traditional farming techniques which are deployed by the crofters. It's easiest to see before early June, which is before the sprouting flag iris beds conceal pairs and their offsprings. Even so, it's best located by call, that wonderful mechanical, which really has to be heard to be believed. But the corncrake's just one voice in North Uist's choir. There are singing skylarks everywhere, corn buntings here, and twite abounding, further indicators, these rare songbirds of amenable agricultural practices. But arguably even more special are the breeding waders. So on marshy grassland, there are redshank chivying, there are snipe bleating, there are lapwings peewitting, and on the Macker itself, there are oystercatchers piping and ring plovers peeping. Meanwhile, over on the moorland, there are curlew bubbling away and golden plover whistling. And the sheer numbers and diversity really stretch credulity. It's a wonderful experience to be up there when these northern, particularly northern breeders are so vociferous and in such number. Now, while exploring the open moorland interior along Committee Road, there's a few things to look out for, different things. So look out for short-eared owl and look out for hen harrier as well, and perhaps red deer, which often occur in these moorland areas. Back down at the coast, it's time to check sheltered spots for marine mammals. So otters really quite widespread, and families searching the shoreline or frolicking in the surf. And if sea mist combines with onshore winds, then look out to sea for a real treat. The northwards passage of Arctic breeding Pomerine skua and here, long-tailed skua, the former replete with tail spoons, the latter with these wonderful elongated tail streamers. It's a true Hebridean speciality. But if conditions don't help, don't worry. By the end of this wilderness-filled, wildlife-fueled weekend, it won't seem to matter what you've seen. You'll have relaxed, you'll have enjoyed, and you'll have imbibed. Now we're going to head back into England for June, and I'm going to take you to my own local area. Why not? I'm based in Norwich, so I'm going to talk about the Norfolk Broads. Where we're going to see swallowtails, if not actually Amazons. So this weekend's all about water, its abundance and its near absence. We'll visit saturated fens, reed-lined broads, and tiny pools in rather arid dunes. So Norfolk's broadlands sort of comprises a mosaic of open water, sodden fen, reed-birds, marshes, carr woodland, all topped by huge skies and distant horizons. And we're going to start at Hickling Broad, probably the most famous water body in Norfolk. And we're going to wander the long distance footpath called the Weaver's Way, which skirts the south side of the Broad. And here, a blur of clotted cream sort of infiltrates your vision and vanishes. Within seconds, it loops back, tearing over your shoulder before careering to a halt on an ivory flower of Dame's Violet. Spurred and fringed, a lacy back with those lovely red eye spots caressed by blue iridescence. There's no doubt that this is a swallowtail, which is Broadland's lord of the butterflies. Despite its rarity and its really compact distribution in Britain, just confined to the Norfolk Broads pretty much, seeing swallowtails is comparatively easy. All you need to do is pick a sunny day with a light breeze, and you should succeed at any number of flights. And indeed, photographing it, as this gentleman is showing, is really quite easy as well, because the nectaring butterflies often allow close approach. Now, back along the Weaver's Way, we're looking for other things, dragonflies, which throng along here, other sites in Broadland. This is a scarce chaser, which is quite a localized creature. But the other speciality is of the Broads is Norfolk hawker. Admittedly, this dragonfly is not actually restricted to the county. It now breeds in Suffolk, it breeds in Kent, it breeds in Cambridgeshire, but it's most abundant in the Broads. And ideally, you'd visit early in the morning on a sunny, calm day, and you'd view this Granny Smith apple-eyed insect at rest before it's fueled by solar energy and becomes incessantly airborne. Plenty of other things to look for as well. Chinese water deer barking angrily at one another is definitely a highlight of the Broads. And in this area of so much water, it seems wrong to explore by land alone. So if you can, try and get waterborne. Try and get waterborne in some way, and try and see some of the wildlife from the water. Now, the next day, I'd suggest visiting Upton Fen Reserve. It's got clouds of dragonflies. I've counted 150 Norfolk hawkers here in just 2 hours. And there's also plenty of swallowtails here. But the star prize is actually botanical. Now, amongst the ragged robin and the sundews and the yellow flag iris and the southern marsh orchids is this species, small, demure, but exceptionally rare. This is the fen orchid. And it's a nationally threatened plant that's subject to some really great conservation work in Broadland. And Broadland's only one of 2 places in Britain that it grows. And they've increased the population of this wonderful plant by, I think, 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. So there's now thousands knocking around the Broads, of which a fair number, 50 or so, can be seen at Upton Fen. And now, if the evening is sort of dry and mild, and particularly if it's been a little bit damp early in the day, I suggest finishing the weekend with an exceptional evening at Winterton Dunes. Now, the beach here is famous for protecting one of the healthiest colonies in Britain of little tern, that irrepressible seabird. But we're going to do something different. We're going to scale the dunes inland to where some piddling pools like this, some natural, some man-made, all fenced off to secure them from dogs, huddle in heathy hollows. And I suggest just choosing one pool and winding down. And as you relax, perhaps a cuckoo will call before it goes to roost. And as the dusk comes in, then a woodcock will rode over in its display flight. And as the sky really thickens, a nightjar will chirr in front of the woods a little bit further inland. But as dusk becomes dark, a different chirring pulses from the pool. And this is the chorus of a group of male natterjack toads. Now, using binoculars or night vision equipment if you want, it's worth scanning the shallows for this really rare amphibian. Each squeaky rattle the male produces is produced by this inflated vocal sac that gleams quite white in the gloom. It's a truly marvellous end to a cracking weekend in my own home county. Okay, on to July. We've done 6 weekends. We've got 6 more to go. And we're going to head back to Speyside, back to the Highlands, but for a very different suite of wildlife. This time you won't see any grouse, and instead we're going to look for insects and dolphins and flowers. But to see it all, you will need a little bit of fun, a little bit of sun, sorry, you have plenty of fun. Abernethy Forest is the core area to visit, and as you approach the forest, as you approach Loch Garton, there's a pool just south of the road where a short boardwalk leads you out. And you hear this is one of the best places in Britain to see a very rare creature called the northern damselfly. It's nationally threatened, it's restricted to the Highlands, and this is probably its most reliable site. With luck, you should also see a more widespread acidic pool-loving species, the black darter. And as you get closer still to Loch Garton, look for creeping lady's tresses, which is a whirling ivory flowered orchid, which caresses the ground beneath these wonderful Caledonian pine forests. With luck and sharp eyes, you'll also see an even smaller orchid, the lesser twayblade. Now, I say small, it can be as little as an inch tall, so it's really quite bonsai. Now, at Loch Garton itself, osprey should still be around. I mean, to be honest, some of the rare breeding birds, such as crested tit, really aren't looking their best. They're in the middle of a body molt. But at least red squirrels should keep you entertained. And you can even look out for the odd doppelganger red squirrel while you're at it. If you're into insects, the forests of Caledonian pine forests are full of really corking insects. This is a bumblebee robberfly, nationally threatened species, disguised as an unthreatening bee, but actually a fearsome predator. And then it's worth heading off to a nearby sundew-rich pond, boggy pond, not very far away from the Loch Garton, which holds white-faced darter, which I reckon is a true rock star of an insect with those kind of black sunglasses and black leathers suffused with sort of bright red, blood red patches. Really quite special creature, a rock star insect. The following day, kick off with something different. Let's go and see some butterflies. Let's go and see small pearl border fritillary, which will be on the wing, at Inch Marshes, another RSPB reserve. And here also, if we're lucky, we'll see the first Scotch Argus of the summer emerge. And obviously, as the name suggests, There's not very many places outside Scotland where you can see this species. You can get it in northwest England, but it's predominantly a Scottish species. And then head for a little bit more dragonfly action to a place called Lowen, which holds 2 more scarce dragonflies. This one's Brilliant Emerald, which has a southern outpost at Thursley Common in Surrey, but is otherwise exclusively Scottish. And then there's Northern Emerald, which is absolutely purely Scottish, in Britain at least, often helicoptering low over the water, its eyes sparkling metallic green above a largely sooty body. And the best place to see it is around tiny bog pools. Now, once you've been sated with dragons and butterflies, finish the weekend by heading north to the Black Isle, where you're going to see some exhibitionist dolphins. Now, the Moray Firth holds the world's most northerly population of bottlenose dolphin. If you're a landlubber like me, then Chanonry Point offers the best views, particularly on an incoming tide, where the cetaceans often perform quite acrobatically close offshore, 50 meters away. If you want to get more intimate, then you can join a licensed boat trip from Cromarty, and with a light at your back, late afternoon offers the best photographic opportunities. And so your Highland weekend culminates here absolutely appropriately on a complete high. Okay, full-time holiday season now, we're into August. Again, a great variety of things you could do in an exciting weekend. But we're going to head to Wales, and we're going to head to one of not a particularly commonly known spectacle, but one of the best spectacles that I know in Britain for wildlife. So the morning tide in Ceredigion is high and the sea is calm. The wind and sun are both at your back. The conditions are perfect for what may well be Britain's top seabird spectacle, certainly the most unexpected spectacle. And the numbers of participants can beg a belief. Just a couple of score meters off the beach at Borth, there's a feeding frenzy underway, and wherever you look, there's feathered commotion, a seething mass of famished birds with long wings and sharp bills piercing the water. Manx shearwaters dominate the action. There's tens of thousands of them streaming on the surf, up to 4 birds a second I've counted, and perhaps 1/10 of the entire world breeding population assembles in Borth Bay between the end of July and mid-August, congregating here to feast on whitebait and sand eel before fueling their autumn migration to south of the equator. Now, as you can see, Manxies may be the star, but they're not the only star. Gannets from Welsh breeding colonies throng here, sort of spearing the sea and seizing fish with that immense dagger of a bill. Now, when the retreating tide sort of dissipates the activity, it's time to head north to a nearby Montgomeryshire Wildlife Trust Reserve, where the Wildlife Trust has managed to help the return to Wales of breeding ospreys by constructing an artificial nesting platform. And in mid-August, the brood should be honing its fishing skills before flying south for the winter. Following day, head inland. Wales has got some mountains, so where better to explore than Mount Snowdon. There's simply no beating sort of the raw majesty of the juxtaposition between stony summits and magical moorland. Now, Snowland is revered by botanists, but the specialities here tend to be rare and localized. You need to know where they are, really. So montane rarities such as alpine sawwood and alpine saxifrage, if you haven't got grid references or you're not prepared to climb, it can be quite difficult to see them. More familiar plants are headed by a yellow bloom duo, of which this is one, so globe flower here, but also the wonderful Welsh poppy. But the reason I'm bringing you here is for and what I believe is Snowdonia's top wildlife highlight is an ostensibly quite surprising mammal. It's unquestionably not native, but it's unequivocally wild and field. So feral goat is absolutely at its element here on the rugged mountain inclines. They were introduced to Snowdonia by Neolithic man 5,000 years ago, and they ascended the hills here 3,500 years later. Their descendants, many times removed, unshackled from the herder's clutches, have never left. So there's now 1,000 of these shaggy ungulates with backswept horns inhabiting Snowdonia. And it's just about the start of the rutting season as well in August. So you may see some kind of head clashing and fighting for the right to mate. So this animal, this feral goat, it's not your Billy Grove gruff. This is Britain's answer to the ibex, I reckon. Okay, into the final third of the year now, and again, September offers lots of things to do, from looking for fen-rife spiders in Suffolk to going on a cruise on the Yorkshire Bell in front of Flamborough Head, or heading down to Norfolk for grey seal and fallow deer. But we're instead going to stick with the first weekend, and we're going to have a Chiltern Challenge, so not too far away from where you all are, I suspect. So the Chiltern evening is balmy and it's windless, it's expectant, and as the gloaming retreats into night, a hoarse grunting erupts from the twiggy yews by the side. As you wait, the guttural calls jump an octave and become excited squeaking. You position your torch, check that the red filter is adequately shielding the light and illuminating the area. And what do you see? You see this. Edible dormouse. 2 huge eyes pleading back at you from the branches, bushy tail dangling long below. This is incomparable cuteness in mammalian form. Edible dormouse was introduced to England in 1902, and it's Europe's cuddliest rodent, and it thrives in the forests around Tring, particularly in Wendover Woods. Now, warm nights in late summer, early autumn, so September is perfect, present prime time viewing. To see them arrive shortly before dusk and wait for the mammals to start calling and clambering before flicking the switch on your light. This is a really quite a neat way to start a trip packed with really special Chiltern creatures. The next day, head to Aston Rowan, which is when the weekend proper commences. Beside the M40, I'm afraid, but spectacular in their own right. These steep chalk escarpments are perfect for photographing red kites, which coast by on the uplifts of air, their forked tails twisting, their rufous tones glowing in the morning sun. As you all will know very well, the kite reintroduction scheme has met with such success that there are now hundreds of pairs in this area, and it's a really special place to see them. But Aston Rowan is brilliant for smaller creatures as well, smaller flying creatures indeed, particularly a bevy of chalk-loving butterflies. You shouldn't have too many problems in spying the silvery blue hue of these chalk hill blues, but you'll need somewhat sharper eyes, I think, to discern the smaller duo of brown argus and of silver-spotted skipper. This gorgeous seal-eyed butterfly is a real Chiltern speciality. It's incessantly active, it's invariably fast-flying, and photographing it on the short turf requires really quite swift footwork, but also a lot of patience. Many is the time that I've chased butterflies around only to give up being able to photograph them and then just have one alight on a flower nearby. I should have waited and watched and photographed them that way. Now, Aston Rowan offers plenty for those with a botanical bent as well as those interested in butterflies. And above all, there's a dapper display of a nationally scarce plant called the Chiltern gentian. And beneath the sort of lilac carpet of flowers, there's plenty of other things to look for as well, particularly citadels of yellow meadow ants. Now, one estimate is that there's 500 million of these yellow meadow ants residing at Aston Rowan alone. Following day, head a bit further west along the M40 to either Whitecross Green Wood or Burnwood Meadows. And here your quarry is a scarce, your Chiltern Challenge is a scarce localized butterfly called the brown hairstreak. Now this is a really beautiful butterfly with these wonderful tail-like protrusions trailing from its bronze hindwing. And it's the very last British butterfly to emerge each year, assuming there isn't a colony of Queen of Spain fritillaries or long-tailed blues, which occasionally happens. But this is the last real resident butterfly to emerge. It's scarce, it's localized, it's elusive, and it usually remains concealed in the canopy. However, stands of blackthorn, which are critical to the species ecology, entice females to come down from the canopy and down to eye level, where they deposit these glorious, we'll see it in a second, tiny little eggs. Now, spotting a female black hairstreak creating the next generation is perhaps the ultimate Chiltern challenge. So if you manage to succeed, then reward yourself with a final evening back at Aston Rowan, looking for what else but the gorgeous glowworms that light up this place at night. Okay, we're into October, into our final quarter of the year, 3 weekends left. And again, October it's probably my favourite month of the year, in birding terms at least. And it's thus logical for me to talk about going to Spurn in October. Seep, seep, seep. That's my pathetic attempt at the exasperated sigh of a flock of redwings exploding from a coastal bush, which is just about audible above the shushing of an easterly wind. And in the half light of pre-dawn, this is a really good sign. It means that songbird migration is happening, and it's happening right here, right now. And as visibility improves, you realise that the hawthorn hedgerow you're stood beside is swarming with thrushes. There's not just redwings, but there's also fieldfares, there's song thrushes and blackbirds too, all freshly arrived from the continent, all hungry, all tired. For you at least, this is a very good sign. You should be in for a day of absolutely magical, miraculous migration. So I reckon Spurn Point is perhaps the best site in the country to appreciate such bird bedlam. Its location jutting across the Humber estuary, one of the most easterly points in northern England, is one reason for its preeminence, and the other, of course, is its geography. A 6 kilometre long sandy spit in places no wider than 20 or 30 metres, covered with dense sea buckthorn and subject to the cycles of seaborne destruction and reconstruction. So little wonder that this is, home to one of the most famous bird observatories in Britain. And if you haven't stayed in the New Obs building, do so. It's a really special place, really wonderful indeed. Now, if clear skies over Russia or Scandinavia have happened the previous evening, that's perfect for coaxing birds into starting their migration to winter climes. So if there's easterly winds, that blows them over the North Sea. And if they encounter fog, rain or cloud, that confuses them to dropping onto the British coast. And in perfect fall conditions, birds simply raindrop from the sky before cascading into cover. The vegetation below bristles with birds. There are redwings flicking everywhere, perching on any kind of hawthorn type bush they can. There are fieldfares flying around by the dozen, and there may even be something like a ringoozle, carpets of thrushes collectively spiraling away when you approach, ringoozles such as this bird betraying their presence with a stony chat. Now, sea buckthorn at Spurn provides dense cover, but not just for thrushes. You may well be lucky to encounter a long-eared owl and get absolutely cracking views as it perches, waiting to recover enough energy to fly off inland. Meanwhile, on a really good day, exhausted robins treat people as trees, feeding beneath people's legs, even perching on shoulders. You turn from observer in this wonderful arrival to participant, to habitat, and the adrenaline really starts coursing through your veins. So you start looking for slightly rarer birds. Perhaps a black redstart might flick its fiery tail. And then you suddenly realise there's the sort of mid-morning onwards, there's a sudden rush of freshly arrived goldcrests. This is Europe's joint smallest bird, don't forget. And they're foraging among seaweed rather than in trees. And of course, where there's goldcrests in number, it's a real sign that there could be something else scarcer for you to find. And the keener your attention, the greater your chances of finding something quite scarce or rare, such as firecrest, the other joint smallest bird in Europe. And that would be a find in itself. But how about you raise your sights and go for a yellow-browed warbler, a species becoming increasingly common in Britain as its breeding range spreads west? Or how about you go for something rarer still, such as the beautiful jewel that is a Pallas's warbler, which start arriving here from early October, particularly mid-October onwards, this 7-striped sprite with that wonderful crown stripe. Or perhaps you go for something really quite skulking, like a Rad's warbler, or even a dusky warbler, again, birds redolent of Siberia. Perhaps a red-breasted flycatcher will show really well for you. And, we can only dream, but last year's record showing of red-flanked bluetails does suggest that it's an increasing possibility, and that this once mythical bird will become almost regular, almost commonplace each autumn. I don't know how many there were in Britain last autumn, but I think we had something like 20 in Norfolk alone. This is a bird that was, almost impossible to even dream of in Britain until the mid-1990s. And just to show you that I'm not fibbing, here's a couple of birds that I saw at Spurn when I was there 2 Octobers ago, even without the easterly winds that are meant to bring them in. So this is olive-backed pipit, and this is rose-coloured starring. So on a truly fabulous autumn migration day, Spurn really is the place. Okay, into November now. Again, a whole series of options, but we're going to head to Lincolnshire, and we're going to head to Donanook on the coast. And from a secluded hollow in coastal sand dunes at Donanook, disproportionately large and endearingly liquid black eyes smoulder atop the creamiest and the fluffiest of marine mammals. Love me, don't leave me, those eyes seem to plead. Now, Britain hosts perhaps half of the world's grey seal population, and Britain's second or third largest breeding colony is at Donanook in Lincolnshire. Now, year on year, there's been a great increase in seal numbers, but there's also been an explosion in seal watchers. Now, some 3,000 seals now pup here each year. We're producing roughly 1,000 pups a year, but on some weekends, there can be even more people than that visiting. So this massive mammal creates potential tension between the watchers and the watched, and clearly wildlife's welfare must come first. So Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust provides a warden viewing area in the dunes that enables superb views of the seals, but avoids disturbing them. And that's a real risk in some unwardened sites, such as in Norfolk, where often dogs off the lead, inattentive dog owners run amok and have been seen biting seals. So here it's different, and what I suggest you do is you sit down, you take your time, and you soak up the action. I recommend focusing on a small number of individuals and just observing their lives for several hours. You might see a female arriving ashore a day or so before she gives birth. You might see a newborn, or the first sign that a newborn that's emerged, which is usually a squabble of gulls scavenging the afterbirth. So it's a truly special day, and one worth indulging yourself with several hours of sedate, calm, exciting wildlife watching. The following day, I also suggest spending leisurely, but there'll be a lot more going on. And I suggest going to Gibraltar Point, which is about an hour south of Donanook at the standoff between the Wolds and the Wash. And here, if the tide is rising, you should be able to watch thousands of roosting knot. And as the shorebirds sort of arrive 2 hours before peak water, they smoke across the sky before eventually pitching down to huddle in a single mass. And movement when they're down the ground is kept to a minimum, but every so often, perhaps in response to a peregrine, real or imaginary, flock members lift into the air and wings frantically flap before they eventually return to their repose, their position of rest. There's also plenty of brent geese here, dense flocks of dark-bellied brent geese squeaking and yelping their way across the sky in the salt marsh. And if you look hard, you can see what kind of a breeding season they've had, because you can tell the juveniles, the youngsters of the year, by the white fringes to many of the wing feathers, which you can see on several birds here. And that suggests a good breeding season if there's a good number of juveniles. But even if there's not, they're wonderful geese to watch, probably my favourite species of goose. And they're often very noisy as well, which is another reason I like them. But contrastingly silent, and a great way to end the weekend. There might be a short-eared owl slipping by, its beady eyes checking you out, and closing the year's penultimate wildlife weekend. So we're into December. This is last chance saloon. Where are we going to go? Well, I may be biased, but I think we're going to head to Norfolk, and back to the Norfolk Broads. Now, long winter nights are all about sleeping for birds as well as for bird watchers. And whilst humans tend to roost alone or in pairs, many species of bird congregate in numbers, large numbers, to doze away the darkness. The segue between night and day, so in the evening and at dawn, such mass dormitories provide quite scintillating sights. And I reckon that there's probably nowhere that's better to experience these than Norfolk's Broadland. And so we're coming back here for the second time this year, but with a wholly different suite of species to appreciate. We're going to start in the Eastern Broads near Horsey, where swarms of pink-footed geese emerge into the rosy dawn, leaving their sleeping quarters for daytime foraging grounds. And the pinkfeet of northeast Norfolk are really increasing in numbers. Pinkfeet overall seem to be becoming a lot further south than they did a decade or so ago. But while we're here, we're also listening for the bugling of cranes, which is often the first sign of birds flapping in a stately fashion to feeding grounds. They're the height of a 7-year-old cranes, and they recolonized Britain as recently as the 1980s, here in the Broads, after an absence of 4 centuries. And the wintering population is now roughly about 40 birds in East Norfolk, and a place called Stub Mill is the most reliable destination to see them. Finished the day, I think, at another RSPB reserve a little bit towards Norwich called Strumpshaw Fen. There's a good chance of otters in front of the hide at reception, but we're actually here for another collective roost, which is this time starlings in full murmuration mode. And there's nothing quite like a starling murmuration. Every second, every split second is a different vista. And you can do some quite wonderful things if you play around with your camera settings to produce shots with a slow shutter speed, as I've done here, which make for a quite different spectacle, a different creative interpretation of something which is fantastic enough in full speed. The next morning, we'll spend the day nearby on the River Yar, just a mile downstream of Strumpshaw, around the reserves, another RSPB reserves of Buckenham and Cantley. And here, the tussocky terrain should be absolutely stuffed with grazing widgeon, and their whistling will be a sort of quintessential winter sound. There'll also be plenty of huddling golden plover and lots of nervously peewitting lapwing. Now, if the lapwing or the ducks are put to flight, it's worth looking around on the ground or upwards for a passing peregrine or a hunting marsh harrier. Now, your target here is a bird called tiger bean goose, and this area, this small stretch of riverside floodplain, is its only English wintering grounds. Up to 300 birds used to winter here on these neighbouring reserves, associating with a couple of hundred white fronts and a few hundred pinkfeet. Each successive year, however, numbers have been dwindling, and this winter only 6 birds returned. And this sounds ostensibly quite worrying, but it might not be quite as much a cause for concern as it does sound. It may indicate that the tiger bean geese are short stopping, which is a strategy beneficial to the geese, because it means they don't need to fly as far in order to get food for the winter. So actually, it's possible that our low numbers of wintering tiger bean geese could be a good thing for the species rather than a bad thing. Now, as you search for these tiger bean geese, Chinese water deer will certainly catch your eye. And it's the only place I know in Britain where you can, on a single scan, see easily a dozen of these vampire toothed individuals. Now, admittedly, as the name suggests, they're non-native, but they're globally threatened, and Britain's population now covers 1/10 of the world population. And they live here apparently without causing any damage. So I think we should be rather proud of these creatures rather than resent them. But darkening skies prompt your own departure to Buckenham railway station platform, which is a rather unorthodox location from which to savour a quite remarkable natural spectacle. The pre-roost crowd of perhaps 40,000 jackdaws and rooks. Now, these birds are protagonists in nature writer Mark Cocker's quite wonderful book, Crow Country. And these corvids stream in from the gloom to gather in station-side fields and on telegraph wires. Now, the gathering is slow to build. You can almost think it's not going to happen at all, but then suddenly it rushes as birds materialize out of nowhere. And then as the remaining light dissipates, the entire cacophony of corvids rises and cascades towards the night's arboreal abode in nearby Buckenham Cars. And it's a truly remarkable end to a wonderful year of wildlife watching weekends. Now, after 3.5 years living in South America and Antarctica, I really do admit that I feared I was going to be bored by returning to wildlife in Britain. I thought there's no way that Britain can compare to South America's Pantanal, Argentine, Patagonia, or Antarctica, or South Georgia, and not a bit of it. In British nature, we have diversity, we find joy, we experience excitement, and it's all on our doorstep. Now, in an era of staycations, and that's what will happen, I'm sure, once we get rid of this wretched virus, there's so much to explore in Britain that I commend it to you. Well, as soon as we can, let's get out there and let's enjoy our own country and the wildlife of it. So with thanks to the photographers who allowed me to showcase their images, and thanks to you all for inviting me here and for listening to me, I hope I've given you inspiration to enjoy the wildlife wonders of post-COVID Britain just as soon as we can get back out there. Thank you.
All
Ordinary tea.
If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
right.
To ask a question.
If she does this well, she'll get through.
I see everybody.
Leslie, are you there?
Yes, I am. Yes.
If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to answer them.
James, if you could choose 1 month and you can't choose Norfolk because you're biased, which one would you choose other than Norfolk?
I could choose one.
Well, you've given us 12 and a couple have been Norfolk. I'm saying ignore the Norfolk ones. Which one would you choose?
It's so hard. But I'm a bird migration junkie.
Yep.
I try and organise my workload so that I don't work in October, because that for me is the most exciting month for bird migration. And if there's a sniff of an easterly wind, then I'll be out somewhere on the English East Coast, and there's nowhere better than Spurn. So if I had to choose just one of them, I'd say go to Spurn, have a fabulous time.
Yeah. I lived 23 years in Hull, so I know Spurn.
I was brought to Leeds.
I've got a book to see some friends in October in Hull then.
Perfect. I was brought to Leeds, so I spent many a teenage weekend in either Flamborough or Spurn looking for migrants.
Thank you.
Anyway,
I was actually, sorry, carry on. Carry
I
on.
didn't want a question, but I was just going to say how wonderful I thought photography was. All the species that we saw, they were all so clear. And as somebody who's not very good at identifying birds, even I could pick out most of them apart from the rarities. So that was a real treat, having such nice, clear views of all the wildlife that you had, not just the birds. I mean, birds we like especially. Because you don't often get a chance to see them in such clear detail unless you peer at a book, and then they're smaller, but seeing them on the screen, really great.
that's great. I'm pleased. Most of the photos were mine, but I must say that the list of people I showed at the end, I've got some cracking shots in there as well, and I was privileged to be able to share them with you.
Do you sit for hours waiting for the right shot?
Increasingly, yes. So I used to do what I used to call sort of reportage nature photography. I used to take what I saw and get the best possible shot in that moment. But increasingly, I sort of plan my images and plan my experiences. And also I rush around a lot less. So I'll sit down, buy a flower and wait for the bee to come back or a bee to come back, whatever it might be. And it's a far calmer approach to wildlife watching than I used to enjoy in my more energetic days.
And it's very weather dependent.
Yes and no, but bad weather can make for some wonderful photos. So seeing pink-footed geese in the fog is absolutely wonderful because you don't know where they are, then suddenly they're all there. So that can make for some good photos. So the one photo I showed, which is 2 red deer in the fog, that's one of my favorite shots in the slideshow because it's just evocative.
Yes, extremely good.
Yeah. James, I wanted to ask you about that collection of Manx shearwaters in Borth Bay. Is there any information about where the breeding grounds of those? Is it mainly off the local coasts, or do the birds come in to feed there from a variety of nesting locations?
So the birds are feeding offshore, so there's no or satellite tagged birds to be able to kind of prove it. But the proximity of both to the colonies of Skoma and Stockholm is very clear, and the birds depart those breeding islands. So at the time they head into both. So the logical assumption is they've come from the nearest breeding colonies. They're not attracted from elsewhere in the world, if you like, but they do congregate this one area.
And it's a feeding ground. Is it a molting ground, or is that something completely different where they molt?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I suspect it might be, because a post-breeding molt would be logical before you undertake a 5,000+ mile migration south. I ought to look back at those photos and see whether you can see any molting birds there. Certainly July, August is a classic molting time, isn't it? So it makes sense.
Can I just say, though, that Borth is further north than Skoma and Stockholm?
It is, but not a huge distance as the Manx shearwater flies.
Okay.
You think they're going to head off and end up wintering off Brazil and off the west coast of Africa, flying 50 or so miles from your breeding grounds to fatten up on some white bait, probably a decent return on investment.
Yeah, fair enough.
Leslie, we've got a question from Pauline.
Yes.
Hi, James. That was a very, very interesting talk. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm a bit of a wildlife photographer myself, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk about equipment or...
I use Canon equipment. I can get techie with lens numbers and camera body numbers, but I've got a kind of a big, heavy, pretty near the top of the range Canon body, and I've
the three.
I've got the 1D X Mark II.
Oh, the 1D, right? Okay, thanks. Yeah. What lens do you prefer?
It depends what I'm doing. So I've got wide-angle lens, macro lens, sort of mid-range 100 to 400 telephoto, and a 500mm big one. So if I was going to go out photographing adders, I'd take the 100 to 400. If I'm photographing moths at home, I use the macro. And if I'm wanting to get sort of creatures in their context, I'll use the wide angle. But if I'm photographing a yellow-browed warbler at Spurn, I'll be taking the 500mm. So it depends very much.
Thanks very much.
I have to say, all these sound very heavy.
Yeah,
They are.
500mm in particular is heavy, and 2 years ago I managed to get sciatica as a result of carrying it 20 miles.
I can relate to that. Yeah.
For your art.
So the question about what's my camera kit is actually quite topical, because I'm finally thinking of going mirrorless, which means a lighter weight kit, but I haven't
Same here.
encouraged
Yeah.
it yet. It's as my body gets weaker, I'll change.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we're all getting that way.
Yeah, it does happen. It takes you by surprise, but it does happen.
Can I just ask what sort of shutter speed would be used for your abstract birds in flight?
Yeah, so for the crows and the starlings, I think most of those take on about 1/15 of a second, and obviously the camera's on a tripod to minimise shutter shake. But you can do it on something like a 1/60 of a second and then pan. So while you're pressing the shutter, just move the camera slightly, and that gives a sense of momentum as well. It's quite a fun thing to do. I mean, most of the time it produces utter rubbish. I probably throw away 99% of my shots anyway, but even more so with those slow motion stuff. But occasionally, one works, and that makes it all worthwhile.
Thank you.
Okay, Roger, are you with us? Can you actually speak?
Go on, Bear.
No, I don't think you can.
You need to unmute yourself, Roger.
I don't think he is muted. It's just not working.
No.
Oh, well, if not, anybody else got any questions?
This is a recommendation. I did have a holiday up in the Hebrides, and the photographs you had of the newest are stunning, and it's the best place I've ever been, to be quite honest.
What time of year was that, Duncan?
June, July, but it was just the bluest sea and the whitest sand, and the mackerel was amazing, and the birds were phenomenal. Corn crakes were cooling, and merlin was everywhere, and it was just wonderful.
No midges?
Oh yeah, plenty of those. But by the coast, it wasn't too bad. I mean, the Hebrides are a strange old place, but it's a beautiful place. And on another note, for local people, I had 34 kite over Thatcham this afternoon, which somebody was feeding. And if anyone's been down to see the starling murmuration down at the reed beds, stunning.
Excellent.
Oh, no.
You're gonna have that back.
Any more questions, anybody? Obviously not, perhaps.
Very good talk. Thank you.
Anyway,
Very good. Thank you.
Can I just ask, would there be a recording be possible to be made available?
Oh, yes.
Right.
That would be fabulous if that was possible. Some of us missed the beginning, sadly.
I've been making a recording, and I will put it on YouTube, and Leslie will circulate the link, I think. It'll take me a couple of days to do it, but it'll be available.
Oh, great.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
I'm sure it will be worth seeing. Well, in the absence of our chairman, Roger, being able to actually speak and have us hear him, I don't know what happens with his computer, but it's not working today. I would like very much to thank James for coming today, even though he hasn't come, but at least if it had been booking him from Norfolk, we probably never would have done it. But it's been a fantastic opportunity, and we've had some wonderful ideas. And I believe, actually, James, this is one of your books, is it not?
It is, yes. There is a book whose cover title should be on the screen now. 52.
It is.
Yep. Which I think would be very helpful to us all, especially for me arranging or suggesting places to go for the weekend, long weekends, as long as somebody else arranges them, because I don't want to do it all. But I think we've had a wonderful evening. It's been so informative. I've taken huge numbers of notes. So when I do the next field views and the programme report, which won't be able to have any outings listed because we haven't been able to go anywhere. So it'll be another report of the meetings we've had on Zoom. And I'm really thrilled that you've been able to come today, and it's been a really wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Obviously, next weekend is cancelled. Please keep an eye open for the February Zoom meeting with, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, and I didn't have it. I haven't got the field views local. But anyway, I will remind you, and